news on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. So we continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. This is, in fact, our 20th Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. With me tonight is my co-host, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, Attorney Mark Douglas, and former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire. Good evening to all of you gentle people. Tonight, we discuss the topic, what does reparations mean for Dominica? And we have a few talking points or questions, if you like. What is the case for reparations for Dominica? Would we be compensated by the US and EU for a corrupt CBI program, as OCS had suggested at the recent meeting in Dominica, especially in light of US Representative Nancy Mace's bill placed before the US Congress, slamming the door on countries like Dominica, which she claims are endangering American communities? What does this all mean? Are we owed reparations? Who owes us, and how should this be measured? Who is to pay these reparations, and who should receive that payment? What should be done with the proceeds? Can our current leaders be trusted with that money, considering how they treat our elderly, our students in need, and how our government uses donated assistance for Dominicans who are in need? Will it be used for the benefit of those who need it most? How should reparations be administered if we do receive it? Should we be paying Britain, for example, for its colonization, as British parliamentarian Suella Braverman recently suggested? Should the descendants of slaves receive compensation from those who enslaved their ancestors? And why should they receive payment for past wrongs? Are there any precedents for such payments? And finally, does intergenerational trauma and economic legacies of slavery justify reparations? So tonight we look forward to contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andre, Attorney Mark Douglas, and former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire on this topic, what does reparations mean for Dominica? So as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and a big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, our police and fire officers, teachers, nurses, doctors, and public and private sector patriots, and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. We welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. So we embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambian and Console, directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. And just before I go to Justice Dr. Irving Andre, I wish to take this opportunity to pay a brief tribute to the late prominent businessman Macmillan John Baptist, who passed away on Monday, July 21, 2026, at his residence on Cross Lane in Roseau. Mac, as we call him, started from humble beginnings and became a household name in Dominica. He was a very humble man throughout his life. I believe he started out as a baker in his teenage years, and he never looked back. He was indeed a good, honest, and hardworking man. Mark was a pioneer of Dominica's local private sector, who dedicated his life to service to his community and to his country. He was indeed a true patriot. He embedded and trained his sons in his businesses for legacy, sustainability, resilience, and continuity. He grew into a solid hands-on businessman and entrepreneur which drove him to build an enterprise comprising several businesses, including in the petroleum industry. He became a prominent member of Dominica's lead private sector institution, the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, DIC. It is truly incomprehensible that Macmillan John Baptist was not given the highest award and honor that the government of Dominica has to offer to such deserving, accomplished citizens. I'm pleased to have known and enjoyed a close association with Mr. Macmillan John Baptist. Mac worked throughout his life, well into his late years. I see this as a true remarkable testament to his work ethic. I wish to express my sincere condolences to his sons and other surviving family members on behalf of myself and my family, and also on behalf of our Q95 staff and our local, regional, and global Q95 family. May your soul rest in eternal peace. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his opening comments on the topic, what does reparations mean for Dominica? Over to you, Dr. Andre.
Well, let me say good evening to your panelists, esteemed gentlemen that they are, and obviously Lambi is on the control, Sherwin is in the background, Mr. G, you were there, and obviously your listeners, hopefully there are some this evening, and who hopefully will share their own views on this significant topic. Let me indicate that in terms of reparations, the idea is a very simple one. That is to say, those who committed harms, in this case, harms in the involvement of slavery of typically African people, should be made to pay compensation for the harms done. It is a concept which you find in criminal law, for example, in contract law, that you should not be able to walk away if, particularly in the field of slavery, that that you were intimately involved in. Let me just give you some broad figures or estimates given by some international organizations, such as, for example, Amnesty International. That organization theorized, or they estimated that between the 16th century and the 19th century, 25 to 30 million Africans were uprooted from Africa and brought to the Americans and elsewhere. And they were not brought on a tour, on a picnic. We know exactly why they were brought. Of that amount, 12.5 million, it is estimated, were enslaved upon the arrival in the so-called New World. And of that amount, it is estimated that at least 2 million of these Africans, they perished during the journey. In fact, there's one notorious case where this sea captain dumped, I should say, his cargo of African slaves on their way to the New World when he faced a tempest, when he faced a storm. And in fact, it ended up in the courts of England, if I recall correctly. And ultimately, if I recall correctly, or at least initially, they ruled in his favor that he had the rights to property and he could deal with his property as he saw fit. But we don't have to go there. There's no need to. But why should these countries be held responsible and liable?
Your mic is muted, Dr. Andre. You need to unmute your mic.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get that.
Okay.
Let me say that reparations can come in different forms. It can come in the form of a check, for example, from those responsible for that heinous part of our world history. It can come in the form of supporting programs. It can come in the form of what we call restitution, and it could come in the form of even giving satisfaction to the generations or the descendants of those who were enslaved. Why should these countries be made to pay reparations? The central argument advanced by many of these countries implicated in the slave trade is that, well, at the time that Africans were imported or were uprooted is a nice word, they were stolen basically, sometimes at the force of a gunpoint or the sword. Slavery was not condoned by any international law. That's the argument which is typically put forward and so on. But slavery was odious in many different ways, not just from a legal perspective, but from a moral perspective, from a religious perspective. It's kind of ironic that many of the major churches, whether it's the Church of England or the Roman Catholic Church, were merely involved in one way or the other in the importation and the enslavement, not just of African slaves, but indigenous persons, particularly in the Caribbean. But they had just had to sing Salve Regina, and their consciences were clear. Why now? Why slavery has been ended for a long time? Well, there are legacies, and in many cases, we are still, or in many instances, former colonized persons or countries are still grappling with the effects of slavery. And I just took a little note. I mean, you have the whole institution of the institutionalization of racism, for example. That's a distinct legacy of slavery. You have the exploitation of the resources of many of these countries, typically regarded as, quote unquote, as Black. And in terms of the exploitation of resources, it is very significant to us and is very relevant to us. And it strikes a chord because we are grappling with the effects of neocolonialism, where our resources, our environment is being ravaged in a lust, not for stones, but for copper. Unless you're stupid to believe it's stones they're looking for by digging 200 feet into the ground. We have the whole question of, as I said, the degradation of the environment. We have colonial era legislation still evident in many of these small island constitutions. The whole the criminalization of burglary laws, for example. We have the whole thing of vagrancy laws, and I'll come to that in a minute, all imported from the institution of slavery, and other deleterious effects. In the West Indies, and certainly in Dominica, the legacy of slavery continues unabated. Bear in mind, in the island, on about 1833, there was the abolition of the emancipation of slaves. However, here was a different type of reparations. The slave owners in most of these countries, including the islands, and some of them not just white, but mixed white and black or brown, they were compensated for their slaves in the Caribbean to the tune of $20 million. That would probably amount to, in today's dollars, probably at least $1 billion. So the slave owners received compensation for their slaves, their human slaves, that were freed. But they were not even freed. That's the problem. They came up with an apprenticeship program where the former slaves had to make themselves available to work on the former plantations where they were enslaved. But not only that, in many of these islands, including Dominica, they instituted legislation to make it a crime for the ex-slaves not to offer themselves to work on plantations or former plantations in the island. They call them vagrancy laws. They call them the Habitual Idlers Act. The late Bill Power Revere once wrote in a piece that it was a penal exaction to compel labor. You had to sell your labor, and if you failed to do it, you could be found guilty of an offense. Imagine that. So all that was part and parcel of the legacy of slavery in Dominica and elsewhere in the other parts of the Caribbean. But as a general proposition, many of the former slave countries, slave owning or countries that participated in slave trade, they have been particularly reluctant to pay reparations. And here's the irony of all this. Mr. G, you referred to this comment by Suella Braverman. And you know, the irony, it had to be a woman of color, a person of color, to utter that ridiculous statement that the former islands or the former countries that experienced the side effects of slavery should give England some money. There's the overwhelming amount of books that speak to the extent to which the slave economy contributed to many of these countries. I can even name a couple here and there. If you're familiar with that brilliant book of Eric Williams, Capitalism and Slavery, if you're familiar with that brilliant book of C.L.R. James, The Black Jacobins, Slave Rebellion in Haiti, and we'll come to Haiti in a minute. If you're familiar with a book by this American Marxist called The World That the Slaveholders Made, If you are familiar with another book written about West Indian slavery called A Slave or a West Indian Fortune by a guy called historian called Richard Paris, you will find everything you need to know about the wealth that the slave economy created and how these other countries, particularly England and France, speaking about the French and reparations, they don't want to pay reparations, but they were prepared to take it with a gun in hand. After the Haitian Revolution, after 1804, indeed in 1825, the French demanded reparations by force from Haiti. And between 1825 and 1947, 122 years, the French exacted or stole or extracted, as a dentist would, from Haiti, what in today's dollars has been estimated to be $21 billion. The United States also has an odious history in terms of Haiti and reparations. In 1915, the US invaded Haiti. They stole every bit of gold from the Haitian treasury and sent it to New York. They introduced racial or racist legislation in Haiti during that period from 1915 to 1934. They nurtured and incubated every dictator you can think of in Haiti, whether it's Papa Doc or Baby Doc or Cousin Doc, you just name it, they backed them to the hilt. And that support continued in the 50s when the Cold War was at its zenith. So whereas many of these countries, they have an aversion to recognizing the moral obligation to pay reparations or to give reparations in whatever form, they themselves, throughout their history, they had no difficulty extracting reparations from colonized countries at the hilt or at the barrel of a gun. So in my view, there should be no debate as to the justification for reparations. But the question is, in what form? And to whom should it be given? The fact of the matter is, sadly, you cannot trust some of these leaders because their history speaks for itself. Are you going to, which of the West Indian islands, which of the West Indian leaders, there may be one or two, are you going to give $20 million and say, look, use this on behalf of your people? Huh? Which of them are you going to do that? Our leaders here? Well, let us look at the past evidence. After all, past is prologue. What happened in the past will dictate what will happen in the future. How have we used monies donated by international agencies or by foreign countries to benefit the plight of the Dominican people? You tell me. How many? Go ask the Kalinago people. How have they benefited from what the late Maduro gave to our leaders on their behalf?
Hugo Chavez.
Hugo Chavez, I apologize. Well, how have they benefited? The monies donated on behalf of the Dominican people, for the most part, has been used to feather the personal nests of our leaders. So if that's the case, then how are these countries going to make reparations to islands such as Dominica and all the West Indian islands, knowing fully well that those who need it most will likely not see a penny of it? Ah, yes, we talk about the housing revolution. Are you kidding me? I heard a program on a station called Q95, Mr. G, last week about someone complaining about the quality of housing in Castle Bruce. And it's not just Castle Bruce, it's elsewhere in Dominica. There are persons who complain that they have been kept out of the loop in terms of assistance on behalf of perceived political allegiance. This thing is going on in Dominica blatantly in your face with the blessings of certain religious readers. Dominus Bobis cum ecum spiritutum. And if that is the case, then certainly one thing we know, reparations in the context of Dominica cannot be simply handing over a blank check to atone for the sins of the past. It would be a waste of money, because that money will not find itself. It will not be used to improve the lot of the Dominican people. So yes, while we do agree and we recognize the need for these countries involved and implicated in the slave trade to make reparations, but we cannot speak with any great assurance that to the extent that they agree reluctantly to do so, then the reparations should be handed over or left in the care of our leaders, because they have shown themselves to be undeserving in terms of acting on behalf of their own people. So we need some creative minds. Probably if you have a United Nations fellow, ambassador here, probably if you have a lawyer from New York here, they may tell us how that mandate, how that commitment, how that obligation should be met. But we know it cannot be met in the usual fashion. And some countries, to be fair to them, have met their obligations towards colonized persons. I'll give you two examples. The Canadian government has given about $2 billion to Indigenous persons and Indigenous communities in Canada to atone for what was done to them and what, to be quite frank with you, continues to be done. You may have heard that the Japanese population, certainly in Canada, I can't speak for the States, their properties were confiscated and they were interned in camps because they were regarded as persons who would betray the Allies. They've received compensation. Israel has received compensation or reparations from Germany on account of the dark history between 1939 and 1946. And there hasn't been too much controversy. Everyone recognized the obligation to pay compensation or to have reparations in terms of these discrete events for these persons. But on the fundamental question of slavery, now I don't know if the reason for the reluctance to make reparations is on account of the color of the persons who were so viciously treated and enslaved and killed. And in terms of Dominica, someone might say, well, Dominica never had this kind of tough slavery and so on. Pure foolishness. You see, before, some historians would take the view, well, you know, the slavery in Dominica, it was a family kind, you know, it was small groups and there was no ill treatment and so on. Read what happened in 1814 during a slave rebellion. How those caught were treated. They were killed 3 times over. In fact, one English writer visited Dominica and some of the other islands in the 19th century, wrote that little well, there used to be a well in the old Roseau Market, the water ran red for months on account of the brutality, the sadism, the sadistic manner in which those implicated in that rebellion were treated, were killed. And this is not an isolated event. It is something that was endemic to slavery. So there's this suggestion implicitly by some persons that slavery wasn't so bad, because the slaves go and buy their bakes and that type of nonsense and so on. That is totally contrary to the truth. It was an inherently brutal system, and it was a system exacted on persons who were regarded as expendable. Actually, persons who were not even regarded as human. And the literature is replete with examples of what the writers of the day thought about slaves. They were only feared because of the perpetual and perennial threat they posed to the slave-holding fraternity in most of these islands. And Initially, the history of slavery and slave emancipation was written from a Eurocentric perspective. It was written from the perspective that it was out of the goodness of the hearts of Englishmen that slaves were freed. Eric Williams' thesis, no, because it ceased to be economically viable. Now, I can tell you that subsequent historians have successfully, in my view, challenged Eric Williams' thesis. And by suggesting that slavery continued to be profitable. But that argument just make the
Crispin,
case.
could you close your mic, mute your mic, Crispin?
The argument that slavery continued to be profitable after 1807, when the slave trade was abolished, it helps make the case for reparations because it shows that the profit was extracted, sent to these countries, and they benefited. Families became rich. The British became rich. The American South became rich. The French, Paris showed with a wonderful, more wonderful light based on the wealth generated from slave ownership in Haiti. So, in summary, as my opening salvo, yes, these countries owe these islands and their former colonies, they owe them some kind of reparation. What form should it take or will it take? I have my own beliefs. I know what form it should not take, because that would just be adding insult to injury. Sadly, in 2026, you cannot trust your own leaders to act on behalf of their own people. Isn't that a sad indictment? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for these opening remarks, Dr. Andre. Yeah, I want to, very poignant comments here from you. To justify the need for reparations for slavery. You did not touch on the most recent, and I'm sure that you will pick up on that a bit later on when when you come back. The OECS heads asking for compensation from the EU for this passport thing. But I will go over now to former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire for his opening remarks on the topic here tonight. Crispin, you need to unmute your mic.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Mr. G.
Okay.
Good evening, Dr. Andre, and my fellow panelist, Mark Douglas. And of course, let me hail Lambi at the controls and Sherwin, the engineer, for keeping us on the air. And good evening to all the listeners of Q95 at home and abroad. Mr. G, from last week when we were on the program, and this program is sort of a continuation of themes that were raised last week. So I'm very honored to be here and to contribute further. I must say that the rapid turn of events affecting Dominica and the sub-region, the Eastern Caribbean, is I can't keep up. I can't keep a pace with so many things are happening. Let me say that Dr. Andre has framed the reparations discussed. So I'm not going to go into. He's done that so well. There's no need for me to go and talk more about that and to talk more about other things. I will say at the outset that yes, reparations are due for slavery. For my whole life, I have been fighting for that, and I should mention to the audience that during the time when I was at the UN, some people said that I was doing petty things of no consequence, really, which I found odd, and such people are supposedly learned people. And what they were referring to is that the role I played to ensure that the United Nations honored the legacy and of the millions of Africans who were extracted from the African continent and brought to the Americas. And for that, I played a role along with other ambassadors of the CARICOM to ensure that there would be an international day of remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And that day, that date is now recognized every year by the UN on the 25th of March. But I didn't stop there. I wasn't contented with just that. That was an important achievement. But I went on as a partner with the late Ambassador Raymond Wolf of Jamaica to fight for a memorial to the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And if anyone listening were to ever visit the UN, and you don't even have to be able to go inside the UN, but in the yard of the UN, and just tell the security you want to see the slavery memorial, it's right there. So that is what people like me have worked for and left that continuing legacy. And we know that. But the next step has to be the realization of reparations. Now, it's not an easy road to travel because there are so many countries that perpetrated slavery and the movement of African people to the Americas. And not just to the Americas, there were a lot of Africans taken to the Indian Ocean, countries like Iran, countries in the Middle East. Then you had people who were taken across what's called the Trans-Sahara trade. So a lot of people have been extracted. So it's a global responsibility that still needs to be resolved because Africa deserves that. Now, I was heartened last year when the CARICOM countries went to meet the African Union. And one of the things that was discussed is that the African countries said, yes, we will join with you in your fight for reparations. And most recently, in this year, I believe it was in the month of May, the government of Ghana had a conference that dealt mostly about reparations and the fact that Ghana is taking the lead to join the CARICOM countries to push for the Europeans to pay reparations. Now, as to whether they will do it in my lifetime, I don't know, but I leave it to the next 2 or 3 generations of Caribbean youth to continue that fight, because we must do that. But Mr. G, when we talk about reparations, let me quickly add that we must include the indigenous people of the Caribbean. And not just the indigenous people of the Caribbean, but the indigenous people of the Americas. They deserve reparations. But if we take it down to Dominica, the indigenous Kalinago peoples of Dominica must get reparations one day. So it's not just the African descendants. It's also the Kalinago, the indigenous people of St. Vincent, in Trinidad and elsewhere in the Caribbean, whether it's South America, Belize. Mr. G, one of the things that disturbed me last year was that in the fight for electoral reform, there was a protest that turned violent. And to my amazement, 25 people were arrested. And the charge that they're being prosecuted on is called the Riot Act, which was promulgated by the British in the late 1700s. That act is still on our books. So I just want to say that when it comes to the talk about reparations, we are talking about the Europeans paying us for what they did to us. But part of the reparations discourse is missing that very much that issue of laws from the period of slavery that's still on our books. And sadly, in 2025, one of these laws is being used against our people. And that is really a despicable act. And I have said before, and I'm going to say it again, I'm calling on the Director of Public Prosecution to withdraw this case and nully prosecute like they have done to other laws in the past. That is a critical thing. So we should not be talking about reparations unless the total gamut of issues is addressed. And one of them is those colonial laws from the slavery era. Now, let me quickly, Pete, just say that the rapid turn of events that has happened here, a lot of it is related to the CBI. The CBI has brought untold ramifications for our countries because of deficiencies in the CBI. I would say in 2023, the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe, they put a publication out which titled Misuse of Citizenship and Residency by Investment Programs. And in that document, they outlined a lot of these deficiencies, and they spoke about what we call the residency programs. Is that I think it's the investment by in real estate. There is a term which escapes me, but it's investment it's called the real estate option. I would say that it is the real estate option that has really brought about the concerns of the Europeans in these 5 countries that have CBI in the region. Because they say that these investments have brought in a lot of corruption. And I tend to agree with the Europeans when they say that. Further, we saw in 2025 a new law in the Parliament of the UK, not of the UK, of the EU, and that was called the visa suspension mechanism. And if I were to read something just quickly, it says that Parliament has backed legislation, that's the European Parliament, to make it easier to remove the right to visa-free travel to the EU from countries posing security risk of breaching human rights. And they included in that countries that have citizenship programs. And we'll be talking more about that. And then we fast forward to 2026. Just last week, we were talking about the call by the EU to these 5 countries in the Caribbean that are selling citizenship, that they must end it by 2028. So that was, and that's we were processing that development a week ago, and then at the end of the week, our program was on Tuesday night. By Friday, we are now faced with a new development related again. CBI is connected. It's now a congresswoman from South Carolina has introduced into the US Congress a bill, quite disturbing, Mr. G. It's a bill to slam the door on third world countries endangering American communities. And that law is HR 9710. HR 9710. And as it's tabled before the US Congress, it's called the short title is Third World Immigration Moratorium Act, Prohibition on Entry for Nationals of Countries Identified Concern. And sadly, there are 4 Caribbean countries on that list. One is Cuba, the second one is Haiti, the third one is Antigua and Barbuda, and the fourth one, the Commonwealth of Dominica. And Mr. G, we will be talking further about that, but it's of great concern to me that we find ourselves, and what they're talking about in that bill is to permanently bar people from those countries. Now, it's not just these 4 CARICOM countries. There are 38 countries on the list. Some are in Africa, some are in Asia. Great concern. We don't know if that law will pass, but just the thought that a congressperson could put forward such a law tells me we are in a very dangerous territory. And so I will stop there, Mr. G. That's my opening comments, and we'll continue this further. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for those opening remarks, Crispin. Food for thought. I mean, this is additional to what Dr. Andre has already given us, which we'll come back to as we go along. But I want to move the discussion along now with Attorney Mark Douglas. Mark, incidentally, who's your dad?
Michael Anthony Douglas, the late.
Michael Douglas is your dad?
Yes.
You know, I mean, Michael Douglas was a great friend of mine. When he got ill, I think when he came from the doctor and he was diagnosed, the first place he stopped was at my house. Yeah, I was not there. My wife was there, so he told her to make sure I call him. And then when I went to see him, he gave me the sad news. But anyway, that's for another day. I didn't know that he was your dad. Congratulations, you're a great dad. So, Mark, your thoughts on the topic here tonight, your opening remarks on this.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. G. It's a small world. Perhaps a few days after my dad visited you, he visited me to give me the news of his illness. It's a time that I'll not forget, and it actually makes me emotional at times, very much like the subject matter tonight. Whenever I think about our ancestors and what they endured, it makes me emotional. It's not easy to have these discussions, but it's great to have it in great company. So, it's a pleasure to be with you, Mr. G, Dr. Andre, Ambassador Gregoire, Lambie, and Sherwin, and the community at large. When we think about reparations, I think the primary argument for reparations is that there's a moral and economic imperative to correct a historical injustice, and also to eliminate the wealth gap that exists because of that injustice. I know some politicians, when they have committed wrongs during their tenure, they have taken what's been popular to do now has been to apologize for it. So, I remember Bill Clinton apologized for the actions that he failed to take to prevent the Rwandan genocide. But as Dr. Andre said, when you commit a wrong, you can't just come and say, I'm sorry. You have to make up for it. When we think about Dominica, my research indicated that from 1700 to 1808, Dominica was sent about 100,000 enslaved Africans, many of which probably didn't last long. But we are the descendants of a lot of those slaves that arrived under those circumstances. How do you correct or wrong as grave as enslavement for generations, treating people like chattel, branding them as inferior? How do you correct that? As a lawyer, I guess I can explore some of the ways that we would seek to correct it from a legal perspective. And there are only three ways that I know. One is through the judicial system, and I'll speak about some of the challenges there. Another is legislative, that our politicians can actually take action, create laws, and there are some examples of that that have been done around the world. I know of a couple in the United States. And then there's also individual actions. We could appeal to the better virtues of people and have them recognize that something wrong has been done, that they've benefited from, and they can take individual action. They don't need a law to compel them to take that action. So let's look at the ways that legislatures have taken action in the sphere of reparations. One of the more popular or recent examples of that takes place in Illinois, in a city of Evanston, where the city decided to correct their past wrongs. They created a commission that would investigate the history of slavery and also exclusion of Black people from housing opportunities. And that commission has paid out cash to the Black residents of Evanston that were affected during a particular time period, and also paid out housing opportunities or housing subsidies. Unfortunately, what happens in the United States when a city takes that proactive step, you have other individuals that would seek to challenge it in the courts by stating that it's unequal treatment on the basis of race. So the US Justice Department actually intervened in a lawsuit that seeks to challenge the city of Evanston's take on reparations. Reparations have been paid. I think Dr. Andre pointed to the Japanese internment in Canada, but in the United States, as recently as 1988, there was the Civil Liberties Act, whereby the United States compensated the surviving internees. So if for those that are not aware of the history, during World War II, there was a suspicion that the Japanese in the United States may be colluding and conspiring with the Japanese, which had attacked the US in Pearl Harbor. And they decided to round up the Japanese and intern them. And so that was a very dark moment on the US history, and they recognized it. And they paid cash to the Japanese that were involved and were harmed by that. $25,000 per person. And it was $20,000 per person, and about $37 million in property damages were compensated. You also have the examples of the French. The French compensated the slave owners in Martinique, Guadeloupe, Madagascar, Senegal. They took legislative action to say, you've lost something because of our policy, and we're going to compensate you. So there can be political will. There has been political will throughout history. Unfortunately, it does seem that there is a bias against compensation towards Black people throughout the world. If there is going to be political will within the Caribbean, I don't think we should expect it to come from England or France or the United States, other European powers. If it doesn't come from us first, we have the ability to enact laws that seeks to correct these injustices. Why haven't we? As a people, can we turn towards England and say, why have you not corrected this injustice, when we as a body have the opportunity to correct it ourselves? We take no action. Specifically, I think Ambassador Gregoire talked about the Kalinago. We can take action that recognizes the wrong and injustice that was done to them, but we have not. I think it weakens our position to advocate elsewhere that other powers should take legislative action if we ourselves do not. So that's perhaps something that I hope that we consider. What can we do on a legislative level to correct the historical injustice? There's also the judicial avenue. And unfortunately, I think that that's rife with challenges. You know, when you think about where would you file a lawsuit, that's the first question. Which court would you do it in? Would you file a lawsuit in Dominica? Would you file it in England? And if you were to file a lawsuit in Dominica and obtain a judgment, why would England respect it? If you would want them to respect the judgment, you would want to do it in their courts. But then if you do it in their courts, you have to abide by their rules. And there are a number of rules that would preclude such a claim. First, standing. You know, standing is a principle that says, in order for you to sue, you must prove some relationship between the harm and yourself. And also, you must prove that the individual who committed the harm is who you're suing. So who would we sue that's alive today for the wrong that was committed during slavery? That's a difficult question. A lot of people would say, if it's an individual, I wasn't even alive at the time. How can I be held accountable? Why would I have to pay damages for something that I did not do in my lifetime? Another challenge that would arise would be the statute of limitations. Most statute of limitations probably expire the longest after 6 years. And slavery occurred centuries ago. And so the question is, under the rules of law that exist within the UK, would you even be able to get past that hurdle? And even if you did survive that, you would then have to prove damages. Who would be your witness? There are rules of evidence that say that a witness must have direct or personal knowledge of the facts that they're testifying about. Otherwise, it's considered hearsay. And if that witness did not witness the facts, they're not permitted to testify about it. So on a number of levels, I think the judicial path is probably foreclosed. And so the only paths that are likely available are on a legislative level, and also imploring to the better nature of individuals to do the right thing. And I think we have to start with us taking the initiative in our own home before we can probably ask others to take that initiative in their homes as well. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, of course, all this enlightenment about what the laws that and the various options that are available that we could take. But I mean, it's very instructive that you say that we need to start doing something in our own backyard before we can go and ask other people outside to do it for us. You know, I did, in fact, I know there have been reparations committees set up all over the world in most countries. And in Dominica, I know that the chairman of the reparations committee is Dr. Damian Dublin. I did invite him to be with us tonight. He could not make it tonight, but he did promise that he would be able to make it next week. So let's look forward to hearing a lot from him, because this committee in Dominica has been in existence for probably 20 years, maybe more. And so obviously there must be something that this committee can share with us on what the work that they've done in terms of the reparations. So, but I want to go to Lambi to ask him to open the lines and give out the numbers so that we can take a few calls before I go back to Justice Dr. Irving Andre. So Lambi, I'm going to give out the numbers and see if the listeners want to make some calls.
Yes, the Global View and Q taking your calls right now. The numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are local numbers. The international or overseas number is as follow: 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, all local numbers. International overseas number 305-432-9624. We are standing by for your calls. Back to you, Mr. G.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lambi. Dr. Andre, well, first of all, I must acknowledge that quite a few people who are following us on Facebook and on YouTube tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. There are many comments there. I will try to read one or two of them, as we go along. But you see, we've come full circle here now. We talked about the slavery, we talked about the reparations for slavery, and we talked about the mechanisms that could be used to try to achieve that. But then again, in recent time, besides just the EU giving us up to 2028 to end our CBI programs, and now Nancy Mace, the representative from the US, South Carolina, is now trying to put a ban on Dominicans. Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes, we have a call on the line. Please go ahead, caller.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Hello, go ahead. Have we lost that caller, Lambi? Hello. It seems to be a problem with your telephone line. It's breaking up. Yeah, the telephone line is breaking up. You probably have to try calling on another number, because it's not really working out so well. So you call us back, please, because we value your contribution here tonight. Dr. Andre, but then, of course, we noticed what happened more recently, in terms of the CBI program, and the OECS heads asking for compensation for reparations if they are to end the CBI program. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are as follows. First of all, the CBI program presents these islands involved in the worst possible light. Why do I say that? Look at the case of Dominica. We know that most of the proceeds of sale of these passports, evidenced by persons who are intimately involved in the program, go into the personal accounts of persons involved in the program, as opposed to being used for the welfare and benefit of the Dominican people. This is one of the central indictments of the program. We know the collateral effects of the program. We know a number of persons with dubious backgrounds, criminal and otherwise, have mysteriously ended up with Dominican passports, some diplomatic. The notorious case of Maduike from Nigeria. Corallo, the fellow who was here Alfred, whatever his name is. I'm not his uncle. We know that this is endemic in the program because despite all the protestations to the contrary, there's virtually no vetting taking place. Anyone with money can come and get it. Iranian revolutionary, whatever they call themselves, army guards and so on, crooks from Eastern Europe, they've all mysteriously ended up with Dominican passports. Why? So that if the US bans them or the United Kingdom from coming, they walk through flashing the Dominican passport. And that is what has given Dominica a bad name. That is why all these countries are acting in concert, because the word is out. You cannot trust the Dominican administration for limiting the sale of their passports only to persons who are beyond reproach. So that is the problem that we face. How can we talk about seeking reparations when we are busy selling our souls to the highest bidder? Huh? And here's another thing that we haven't really talked about. Reparations is to repair harm done or damage. And the repairing is not only from persons or countries involved in the slave trade, but the repair has to be internal. Your community has to repair itself. Your community has to rid itself of those values imported or which are this distinct legacy of slavery. Treating people based on what they have financially and what they don't have. Our community has to show that we recognize the intrinsic value of the human spirit, irrespective of race, irrespective of how money they have, irrespective of what car they have, irrespective of how many, how should I put it, how many support ladies that they have. That should not be the measure of the worth of the human spirit. But we adhere to that philosophy, in my view, imported and inherited from the colonial and the slave era, where slaves were treated as chattels, and we perpetuate it. And the evidence of that is, as I said, we are busy selling everything of value in Dominica. Whatever you might think about Raul Gonzalez, he had the decency to say, nah, well, the lady from Barbados, we're selling every passport to anybody. There has to be something that has some value in our. We have to value in the enterprising spirit of our own persons. You referred to Mr. Mack. I heard Mack talking about him throughout the day. Huh? We have to value those values that define us, that give us some credibility and some identity in our community. Values of thrift. Value that if you work hard, you will get ahead. Values that if you want to get ahead in terms of academia, you just have to put the effort, make the effort. Where are those values, Mr. G? How can we talk about reparation and we trivialize those values? We trivialize them. We treat them as if they were the plague. Who is going to take us seriously? You want us to, you can imagine what the English are saying. You want us to give you money? To do what? For you to buy another big house? For you to send to Dubai? Is that what you want our money for?
Let me just interject here, because I was just reading on Facebook there a comment by one of our people following us here. In terms of, do we trust putting this reparations proceeds in the hands of our leaders? They made a comment that also the funds donated by Prince Charles, some $12 million, some 12 million pounds during his visit following Hurricane Maria. What happened to that money?
Well, therein lies the problem. Mr. G. We've made that point over and over again. Dominica seems to be a mysterious pit in which money is donated to uplift the standard of living of the people, to give them hope, mysteriously disappears. There are people today as we speak who still haven't been able to fix their roofs after Maria 2017, almost 10 years ago. They're not getting help, many of them. Why? There are hoteliers in Dominica. You can look at the Garys, you can look at the Arthimates, and there are others who haven't been able to restore or renovate their hotels. Why? What have they done? What sin have they committed? Because they are perceived to be enemies of the state. These are the people you're going to give reparations money? Are you crazy? The biggest enemies to reparation in Dominica is our own leaders, because we know the money will disappear. What a sad indictment. It will not be found. Didn't the same Chavez seek to help us with Petrocaraib? Petrocaraib, Mr. G. Who are the main beneficiaries? The Friends. Who's getting free gas? There used to be a political operative who would go by Macmillan, the now late McDillell, and ask for gas, or you want some free gas? Cherry picking who to help and who not to help. That is the legacy that we have in Dominica, and it raises the question: who is going in their right mind is going to give you money in the name of reparations when you're going to use it to oppress your own people? What about opportunities for your own people in their own country? You are boasting about how many millions foreigners are exporting out of Dominica. Totally shameless. And your own people, you're depriving them of jobs, of opportunities, of business loans, being able to sustain your own little businesses. Your capital, you boast about Dominica being the most beautiful vessel in the Eastern Caribbean. Are you kidding me? Are we talking about Nancy's story right now? So that this is part of the problem. We are seeking reparations. And Dagram Dumblin, I know him very well, We'll talk to you until the cows come home about reparations. But what have they done as a political entity to give reparations to their own people? The answer is nothing. And that is the problem. Do we deserve reparations? We as a people, yes, we do.
Dr. Andrew, I think, Lambi, you have a call?
Caller, please go ahead.
Hey, King Lambi, blessings to you, sir.
Blessings,
At
sir.
the console, showing blessings to you. The Gregors, Dr.
Yes.
Gregor, Dr. Gregor, and Dr. Douglas, and Dr. Andre. Dr. Andre, blessings to you, sir.
Blessings.
You say Dr. Pete. You say Dr. Pete, but you forget to say bottomless Pete. It's a bottomless pit. That's why the monies are disappearing. They're only $6,666. I spent over $2,000 and more over. And to meet 8 requirements, that is about 7, 8 years now, 9 years, I don't know. I can't check well. And I've never gotten redressal. I'm supposed to be a recipient. And guess what? I respect, this someone I was about to say, those criminals just sift through the pile and I was exempted or excluded. I have several suggestions pertaining to do with the whole disbursing that money among the people of the Caribbean. Dominica, for our case, we in agriculture, we in music, we in art, we in fishing, and let us say creating industries and having the people supply the raw products to be processed into those factories. And the first tranche We make sure you need shovels and a vehicle and good roads and all of that. The World Bank give us, let's say, a specified amount based on our predicament and how much we require to get or earmarked to receive. And then the first amount I get as an artisan, and then is, let's say, $10,000. But if I that money is in the bank, if I need more money, and to make sure I buy my paint, my canvas, my board, and everything, and maybe, a few dollars in my pocket, and then to create a revolving fund, the second tranche, then you have to pay, if it's a 5%, a 4%, a 2%, every time you take money, you receive money from that fund, being monitored by the countries and regulated and monitored by the countries that give that money to that country that deserve reparation. That would be a great form of management and supervision and control, because the cluster of thieves, they will make the money disappear. So I want to agree with you 100%. And let me say, one guy was saying quickly, it was an African American guy with a European audience, and he said, if a black man would steal your car, and then he bequeath it to his son, they spray it and it looking different. Is it still your car? He said yes, and he led him on. If then that one give it to his son, is it still your? He said yes, because he was denying reparation. And then when he reached the dead end, so he said, why not we being paid to repair the damage that you have done based on, it's two different things. I know you understanding me. I'm a man, I'm trying to get off the air quickly. So I'm saying, gentlemen, the brutality continues. They're talking about, Africans are selling Africans. But J. Edgar Hoover and them give us cocaine. The Black Panther and the whole movement, the rise of African people, African American. And then guess what? We start to sell cocaine too. So the slave trade was established first by the Arabs, and then the Europeans joined the Bacchanal, and then have some African leaders were sanctioned if they would not voluntarily give the people into slavery, go into a land of no return. So it's a complex situation, but that does not exempt them from reparation or paying for the damage that they have done, so to speak. So I am just saying, I want to commend you, gentlemen. I talk about leadership, it's plural. You have Dr. Andre, Dr. Sheridan Gregoire, Dr. Lambie, Dr. Douglas, and you have Dr. Gregoire again, and all the great minds of Dominica at home and abroad. That's what leadership meant, or was meant to be. Leadership is not plural. It's not
Singular.
it is plural, it is not singular. So we need to move forward collectively to do things that are needed to be done for our betterment. We're always fragmented all over the place, and all of that. But I just want to give thanks and they're listening attentively. Blessings.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for those comments. While we wait for a call from Lambie, you'll take the calls and you just make us a signal if the calls come in, Lambie, and we'll take the calls. Crispin, let me go to you for your further thoughts on this. You see how this is developing. You can see what is really coming on now. I mean, the US, the EU, everybody is now ganging up against us. We're in the black book, so to speak. So Lambie, you want to take a call before we go on?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah. I want to ask a question. I have been hearing about, since I've been listening about reparation. But there is something that troubles me with that reparation thing that we have been talking about for such a long time. Knowing that Dominica was under the French on many occasions, the British on many occasions, and both countries enslaved our ancestors. How do we arrive at a figure? And who are the people that will be representing us when you are about to negotiate with the French and the British, who are already much more advanced than us in our little corner on the globe? How and who? And I would prefer see the ordinary man involved as well in some sensitize everybody. Those who can't even read and write, those who are blind, and all of the people have to be informed. It's like these intellectuals went to England and formalized a constitution, which of course that is supposed to be the guideline for all governments in our country. But the constitution, there are certain things. If I was there as an ordinary man, there are certain things that the constitution has at this moment, which is not in the benefit of the nation, because it gives the government that has obtained many seats to run the country. But there should be other classes or different groups that's supposed to keep these people in check. For example, if, let us say, we have a population of 30,000 people, 10,000 people can impeach a leader. Because what we can see, when leaders are there, the eyes have it. Election calls at any time. There is not a specific date. And so on and so forth. I heard Blessing spoke about money that was given, he was supposed to receive after the hurricane, and none of this money reached him. So what I'm saying is, and my suggestion, it's not only a question, it's my suggestion. I like listening to your program, and this is really something that I believe we need to be sensitizing our children at preschool, primary and secondary, and all of the other schools. First of all, our medical institutions, such as our national hospital, supposed to receive all types of equipment the advanced country has. That is one part of the reparation. People should be getting, scholars from our country should be getting free access to Oxford, Harvard, and have nothing to pay. And that's how long it's going to last for in terms of in that sector. So we might have that reparation thing upon the lump sum they will give us to enable us to excite our economy. But things such as the hospital, equipment for the hospital, that we can make kidney transplants, it's not only pacemaker. Pacemaker is something like a mechanic can do, I'm going to explain it in 5 minutes. So there are more complex issues that we may need people who are highly trained. So migration would not be such of an industry. Going to America and expecting barrels to come every Christmas Day. So, and it's not only that, some other things that they're selling, we are receiving from our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, is not extremely useful. And I have seen barrels, and I'm seeing what is in the barrel. Well, we have a tendency, that traditional thing that we have when we are abroad, we always think of selling things for more people. Okay, that we can let it remain as that. But what about the people who have migrated, living in England, living in America for years, but their ancestors were also enslaved? How are they going to be that is going to be repaired on their behalf? So I see it as something that people like you, Dr. Andre, Mr. G, and all of these intellectuals who I can see on my TV as I'm speaking to you all, it's not only you all have to represent us. You should have Humbug there, give him his idea too, and explain to Humbug and tell him what reparation stands for and what you think we should do. I cannot expect for us to go and get reparation and for us to fall after 6 months, like Patrick John gave us independence, and he did not enjoy that independence. Few months after, what was the economy that we obtained from Great Britain when they gave us our freedom to run our business? And now they want to put visa. And another thing I would like to see in the reparation thing is we should not, in need of visa, go into France and England. And we should be able to stay there however we want, as though we have liberty to go and do business and sit down and sleep and say everything, and nobody's future lost. Because they took us from Africa, and we did not ask them for that. And are we going to also look for the kings and queens of Africa who sold us as well? So it is a complex issue. You can have a tool, a vital thing to discuss now, but I have been deceived by many of the things that we have obtained, and these intellectuals or local intellectuals failed us. And that's why I believe Miss Charles was not in favor of the independence when people like Ruth and all of these guys were sensitizing people for the I believe Miss Charles knew what she was talking about. Because I believe up to today, after how many years, 40-somebody years, we are unable to enjoy our life as we used to enjoy, like in the 70s, in the 60s. can remember as a little boy how nice it used to be in Dominica. I would not want to migrate. I would want to stay in my country. So that reparation thing is not paying any person like anywhere, whether a dentist or a shepherd or a mason to go and discuss. But them people you're going to discuss in France and in America with that is not done scats that are there. These people are highly trained. They're not going to give you the mediocre to deal with us. And I'm sure when we send them guys, I'm going to smile to them, they give them $50, they coming back with it. Just that and nothing else. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot. You did make some suggestions about how reparations could be. Lam, you want to take another call? And let me just shout out to Handbag as I'm on it. Lam, you want to take another call?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead. Caller, are you? We're not going to waste any more time. Go ahead.
All right. So maybe the caller will call back. And if he calls back, he'll just make us a sign. Crispin, you've heard all these comments here now. I mean, your further thoughts on this topic here tonight?
Well, the caller made some interesting points. The problem is that you can't have everybody in that negotiation. You're going to have some representatives who would do that on behalf of the people of the region, and every country would have to put together a team to be in the negotiations. This is not a simple process. It's quite complicated. Now, I would say he made a point about Dominica being colonized by France as well as UK. Well, the thing is that all the European countries are complicit, and they would have to contribute to whatever reparations that we arrive at. The question is, it's difficult for me to say how much money we're talking about. I think it runs in the trillions, the amount of money the Europeans owe. And that's one of the things. They're beginning one by one to apologize for slavery, but they're not committing to pay compensation. And that is how we get them there. It will take, probably not happen in my lifetime, but at some point it's going to happen. I think that a lot depends on what the continent of Africa, how it gets inserted in that discussion with the colonizers. I remember clearly when I was sitting across the table from these very colonizers, the representatives of them, and here am I as a descendant of ex-slaves or enslaved Africans. I prefer to use that term than slaves. I'm asking them to support us, our call for honoring the victims of slavery. And it was a painful experience. So you can well imagine getting them to commit to have to pay. It's still decades away. And I think that the states of Africa must play a role in helping us in that process. Mr. G, I think that if we go back now to the current situation, so the slavery reparations, we all agree must happen or has to happen. I don't know when, but in terms of what the leaders of the 5 Eastern Caribbean countries are asking the Europeans to consider to help them, the impending loss of income from CBI. Well, Dr. Andre made the point. It's not Europe that did these infractions that led to the situation we have. It's our very governments that have been complicit and allowed us. They introduced this system of earning income for investments, and then they lost control of it. They handed it over to developers and passport agents. They have taken things, and so the lion's share of the money is being held by them. And the Europeans are saying to us, you want to ask us for reparations, or you want to ask us for help for climate resilience and other things like that. and your economic development, but you allow these agents to hijack the money. They have it. You don't have it. It's not in your treasury. And that's your fault, not mine, not the Europeans' fault. And then, you know, these people, what the Europeans are basically saying to you is that you have given people access to our countries. And some of them are not people who are bona fide, respectable citizens. And therefore, we're closing our doors to you. And the sad part of it, that is really the sad part of it, it's affecting natural-born Dominicans, St. Lucians, Antiguans, and we can't go to Europe very soon without they've barred us, and they can bar us completely. And now we're seeing what is happening in America. America is moving to put sanction on us so that people can't come to America. Right now, as we speak, we have a partial ban to enter America. That's Dominica and Antigua. Our students, here's the unfortunate thing for our young people. Our students cannot go to school in America this year. This school year starting August, September. They can't get visas. I'm hearing now that our musicians who want to go to the US to perform for Labor Day coming up, their visas may have expired and they will not get their visas renewed. So there are all of these things that have come out of the CBI deficiencies. And I think that if there's blame to be put, it cannot be on the Europeans. It has to be those governments in our region who have been negligent in supervising these agents that they have willy-nilly running around the world, even selling passports at half price, at discounted price. So Mr. G, I don't know. I can't come to support what these governments are saying to the Europeans, because they are the ones who created the problem in the first place. Thank you.
But you know, Mark, there is this allegation that, this new program that was introduced, the real estate option, from that, it seems as if the allegation is that there's billions of dollars being kept outside in external accounts in the control of some people. Alam, you want to take a call?
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen. Very interesting program. Right, but I am listening and I am saying to myself, I mean, as a man from African origin, I would like to see reparation, really. But then really and truly, let us be real, really. Can you hold people now for what their ancestors did centuries ago? That's one concern I have. My other thing is this. Now, Dr. Andre made the point. If you give the money, who's going to share it? How are they going to share it? Right, that's another thing. Now, the lawyer, Mr. McIntyre,
Mr. Mark Douglas. Mark Douglas.
But so gentlemen, it's not an easy thing, you know. I see that thing will be there hanging, and then at the end of the day, we will just continue hanging that thing. That's my view. I may be wrong, but then it's not going to be any easy road to tread. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, and thanks a lot for your remarks there. So, Mark, maybe you might want to tackle that question when you come on. But I mean, I was saying that you know, with all this thing going on there, I mean, it seems to me that the U.S. Treasury Department or whatever or the relevant department should know where those funds are, because I mean, Dr. Andre gave us this information some time ago in one of the previous programs that it was one of the people who was involved in selling these passports who went to court, I think it's in New York, to get their share of the funds. I believe it was it the Kempinski Hotel or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Zampoli. Actually, Zampoli is probably one of the biggest assets of your government because he's a friend of somebody called Donald. What's his last name again? Trump.
Yes, so you can see the tangled web that we're involved in, you know, but it seems to me that if this government really You should have spent all these funds, embellishing all the sustainable sectors like agriculture and manufacturing and agribusiness and the water industry and so on. But they did not do that. Instead, this money seemed to be embedded in accounts overseas. And I hope that the U.S. Treasury Department, Mark, you might be more familiar than me with this, but I hope they would be able to assist us at some point in the future to bring those funds back to Dominica to enhance those sectors.
Mr. G, when we talk about the topic tonight is about reparations, and you can easily fall into the trap of thinking that it pertains to a time period that is centuries ago, and the ramifications and the effects of it aren't still current. In looking at doing some research for this topic, there was one article that I came across that was very interesting. It sought to draw a connection, to connect the dots between slavery, the institution of slavery, and corrupt government. Now, I thought the article was interesting in that it drew a couple of parallels. One, a lack of autonomy. Slaves obviously did not have autonomy. But then in corrupt governments, people do not have autonomy either. Interestingly enough, I came on the program last week, and immediately after some of my friends heard the program and heard that I'd participated, they say, "What, boy? You're not afraid that you'll end up in a list somewhere? That there will be some sort of, retribution because of your participation in a program that has the audacity to criticize the Dominican government?" I mean, is that a system, a society where we exist autonomously, where we cannot even criticize our own government when they are wrong, especially when they are wrong? Slavery also had pervasive fear, where there are people that were just afraid to look at someone the wrong way, out of fear of the physical and harsh consequences that they would face. We also have fear in Dominica. If we can't get on a program like this and speak our mind, why would we not speak our mind if not for fear? Why should we fear our government? Slavery also had a concentration of power in a few. All right. Can we honestly look at the system of government that exists today, where we have one party that dominates all but one or two political seats, and say that's not a concentration of power? Slavery also has limited access to information. Is the press in Dominica free? I would say that some of the more courageous Dominicans that I know are on this program, that you all, Ambassador Gregoire, Dr. Andre, Mr. G, Lambie, yourself, to come on this program knowing that it's not popular, that you make enemies in influential places. I think that takes a lot of courage. But therein lies the problem, that there's something to be said for that thought, that there is a parallel between the history of slavery and the type of governance that we as a people find acceptable. You've asked the question, where is the money? That speaks to a lack of transparency. Well, one might say, well, isn't there corruption everywhere? a few weeks ago, Donald Trump disclosed his earnings in the last year. And he disclosed that he made $1.2 billion in cryptocurrency. Well, as much as people say that Donald Trump is corrupt and America is a bad nation, it's institutions that hold a man like Donald Trump accountable can compel him to show, where did you make your money? That new mansion that you're building, Donald, how did you pay for it? That speaks to institutions that are strong in spite of the political climate. And that political climate can take you anywhere. I know Ambassador Gregoire talked about Nancy Mace and her recent legislation. This is why you don't trust politicians. Why I couldn't see myself being one, because Nancy Mace is being purely opportunistic. There's a reason why she came out with that legislation. And to be clear, that legislation calls for a moratorium on immigration from third world countries. And of the list of countries that will be banned, Dominica appears on that list. Now, is that because Dominicans are undesirable in the United States? Absolutely not. The Dominicans I know in the United States, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they help build this country, they're construction workers, they are nurses, they take care of your children, they clean homes. I cannot recall one instance where I have met someone professionally or socially that has told me, you know what, I know of another Dominican, but that person is bad in some way. Everything I hear about Dominicans in this country, in the United States, is overwhelmingly positive. Sometimes I fear that too much of what Dominica had to offer or has to offer was exported to other countries. And we would be better off as a nation if those people were in Dominica. We've given great things to the rest of the world, and the fact that there are some politicians that call for banning that, it's shooting themselves in the foot. But the reason why she's doing it is because she gave up her House seat in order to run for governor in South Carolina. And there was a primary about 2 weeks ago where she lost the primary. And she senses an opportunity with the death of Senator Graham in South Carolina. Perhaps she wants to get back into the news circle. And what's popular right now is beating up on the weak, beating up on immigrants. So she is taking that opportunity to say, let me jump on that bandwagon and see if I can reclaim some relevance. But that's what's wrong with politicians.
No, but Mark, I understand. My latest understanding is that she says now she's dropped out of the race. She's not contesting the governor.
She cannot contest the governorship. She lost the primary.
Right.
So what I'm saying is her next option
for Senate rather. Yeah.
For Senate.
Yeah,
that she's dropped out of that race?
Yes, that's what I understand.
Well, that's interesting. We'll see. That race, it's still early. The seat has been temporarily filled by the late senator's sister, but we'll see who honors their promise to stay out of it. But, you know, she's a lame duck is what she is in the House now. And I think she's, clinging towards some level of relevance. But that's why we have institutions, and those institutions hold politicians accountable. And it's probably not likely that we have those institutions in Dominica that hold individuals accountable in the same light. There was also talk about reparations for the loss of the CBI program. And, I know that a lot of people have dismissed that as, nonsense, but it's rightfully so. I mean, in order for you to ask for the European nations or the United States to compensate you, I'm pretty sure that no one will ask the United States to compensate them for the loss of the CBI program. I know where Secretary of State Rubio would react to that, but you must have a duty, and in order for someone to hold you accountable, you must have a duty to have done something. And what duty is it that Europe has, or the United States has, to allow individuals that are not Dominicans, Antiguans, into their country? I don't see what the duty is that they have to honor these visas. Perhaps someone can articulate that, but I'm not aware of it.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Dr. Andrew Lamb, you want to take a call? Go ahead.
Yeah, caller, you still there? Caller, are you still there? Nope.
Okay, so Lambi, if a call comes back, just give us a wave and we'll ask you to take it. Dr. Andre, Mark just spoke about the whole question of institutions holding leaders accountable. I mean, in our case, we have an institution that was actually set up specifically to hold our leaders accountable. I think it's called the IPO. What has happened to that?
What has happened to that indeed? What has happened to the Electoral Commission? What has happened to the Director of Audit? I'm not talking about the present one, but the one who's always on radio. How did he fulfill his functions? What has happened to many ministers not ministers, but permanent secretaries? What has happened to other institutions that should hold corruption at bay? What has happened to the churches? There's some ministers, there's some pastors, there's some priests who've spoken out, but as an institution, what has happened to something called the DAIC? What has happened to these institutions? What virus has affected them? Why have they not played a historical role of being the guardians of everything that is moral and fair in the community? Why have most of these institutions simply accept their demise and compromise their integrity by turning the other cheek or sticking their head into the sand? Why? Tell me why. And then we talk about reparations. Let me give you a couple other examples. There are organizations international that have given the Dominican government items on behalf of certain sectors. Cement, for example. Not cement, fertilizer. I know Morocco has given. There may be others, I can't remember. Whatever happened? Crispin Gregg, there's too many Greggers on this program, but I'm talking about Crispin the ambassador. He's a farmer. Ask Crispin how many bags of fertilizer did he get to enable him to develop his crops. The fertilizers have been given to functionaries who have then what? Sold it to farmers who can ill afford to buy the fertilizer. That's how we treat, that's how we prostitute, that's how we traffic in the aid that we've been given, for God's sakes. And this is just one example. NGOs, there was one from Australia who gave Danny Lugay money to help fix up the Lindo Park. Whatever happened to it? They sabotaged it. They sabotaged it. So we're not ready. When we talk about reparations, when these folk talk about reparations, it is not even worth listening, because the biggest enemies to reparations, or we receiving reparations, are they themselves. Because they've shown that they have no interest in uplifting, in alleviating the plight of the working people in Dominica. You remember years ago when a poor lady from Portsmouth had the audacity to ask for help And she was a Laborite. You know what one of these folks said? He's gone to meet his maker. He dismissed her by calling her damn kind of women dear. You understand what I'm saying to you? She's a poor woman. She's not deserving. She doesn't have the right to publicly proclaim the fact that she's in need. Let me ask you this. With that kind of attitude, how can you even talk about reparations? There's a musical prophet who once sang a song, and the lyrics include the following: free yourself or emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free up our minds. When you have that type of internal hatred for yourself and your own kind, who gives you the authority to talk about reparations? There is like a thing. But we talked about reparations. We talk about institutional reparations. I know that Mr. Douglas talked about some of that. But another institution or two other institutions, to their credit, that have spoken in that language of reconciliation, restitution. Some churches, the Church of England, for example, they publicly apologized, and in fact, if my memory is correct, even donated money towards that cause. Some universities, certainly Oxford, as far as I remember, the London School of Economics, I think also Harvard, they benefited. McGill University in Montreal, Queen's University, which in 1919, expelled about 8 or 12 Black medical students because they were Black. And they wanted to please, or should I say appease, the Americans and their racist policies, expel them from their medical faculties. And a few years ago, they had to apologize and develop a scholarship fund for persons of color. So some institutions have recognized their complicity in that travesty, and they have tried to make amends. But as a general proposition, the other countries have failed to do so. But here's how, on a micro level, in my view, many of these governments can at least start walking the road towards repatriation, towards making amends. What about agriculture? Didn't British at one point, you still gave a special treatment for bananas? And then the EU took a position where this preferential treatment would be gotten rid of. What is stopping them from reinstituting that special treatment for Dominican bananas or other produce? What about guaranteed markets to enable farmers to be able to market their crops? Or donating some boats because we know the government, they've been promising what, 15 years ago, Mr. G? Didn't another Douglas, no disrespect to you, this Douglas, Mr. Mac Douglas, your cousin, your dear beloved cousin, Saki now Ian. He promised not one, but 2 refrigerated boats. And you know the irony, Portsmouth is the biggest hub for the export of agricultural produce in Dominica. Not even that he could deliver on. And he made that promise over a decade ago. Huh? What about scholarships? Crispin talked about how unfortunate it is that Dominican students will not be able to enter university in America this year because of these odious legislative initiatives taken by the states. What about these types of what about the getting rid of segregation in many ways? Those of you who live in the States know from your experiences, personal, the guardrails set up to prohibit, to inhibit, to retard the progress of persons of color. And if you progress and if you succeed, it is because of those qualities you have deep within yourselves. Because even when you become a lawyer, you face some ostracism, you face some pushback. So it is because you have set your mind on those types of goals that you have achieved. Nobody's given you anything on a platter. And we have to develop the realization that we have the next generation at the very minimum to give them that mental fortitude and determination, that mental energy to overcome all these kinds of obstacles, real, imagined, visible or invisible, that exist right here in our midst. And we still have obstacles in Dominica based on class and caste and what the Americans call colorism, for God's sakes. And we're not talking about crayons. Those obstacles still exist in Dominica right there. You don't have to take it from me, I'm a Dominican as much as some of our listeners who live in Dominica. But you have to make the effort to say to yourself, no, what is the biblical admonition again, Mr.? No sword shall form against me, irrespective of who is wielding that sword. But the biggest impediment we have, quite frankly, are those we have chosen to lead us, because they hate Dominicans more than anybody else, more than the Americans, more than the English, more than the French, because we're doing it to ourselves. We're depriving our own people of opportunities to get ahead. And unless we get rid of those obstacles installed and inflicted by our own, we are doomed indeed. But there's always hope, after all. There's always hope. I'll stop right there.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Andre. Crispin, it's clear that reparations can take different forms. We've heard some of those forms outlined there. So it's not necessarily all cash. So, but I mean, hopefully we'll have Dr. Dabian Dublin here with us next week, next Tuesday, and he will be able to enlighten us as to what his committee has done over the years, where they are today as part of the international movement for reparations. And so he might be able to update us on what it is that is likely to happen in the not too distant future. But Crispin, your final words on this tonight?
Yes. Well, I think that as we go forward, I wish the leaders well. I understand that they said in their statement that they were all going up to Europe to lobby and speak to the president of the European Commission and the European Council. I wish them well, but I am not optimistic that they will be able to make any argument that will get the Europeans to yield. The Europeans have made the decision. This is in law. There is no legislation across the European Union. For them to get all of these 27 countries to agree to change the law, I wish them well. But Mr. G, there's one thing driving all of this. It's not just the visa ban or the end of visa free into Europe. It's also the officials of government. Government officials are going to be banned. They're going to withdraw their visas as well. And here's the sad thing for some of these politicians in the Caribbean. Those who are oppressing the opposition forces that don't support what they're doing, that is grounds for the Europeans to deny them visas. And they are very worried about that, especially those who are complicit in denying their people their political rights, using force against people when they protest. These are rights that we've earned, and the United Nations system has granted these rights, but governments are not paying attention, or they ignore. But I think the chickens are coming to roost. And in a way, I am glad that the Europeans are taking action to put accountability, force accountability on them. Thank you, Mr. G.
Thank you, Crispin. Mark, your further thoughts on this as you make your closing remarks?
Yes, I join the ambassador in wishing them well. I do question whether or not they are the right group to send to make the case. In that the individuals that perhaps can make the strongest case are probably citizens of the European nations that come from our part of the world. But I think the word is already out on some of the leaders in the region, what they stand for. You know, the statistics on Dominica are that Dominica remains a country that is economically challenged. But that's not the case for our politicians. They're doing well. And it's clear that when you live outside of Dominica, you see how individuals view our leadership. They think that a lot of the leaders in our region and in Africa are corrupt, that they care more about enriching themselves than about their own people. And so when those individuals are the ones coming to Europe to make the case that the visa restrictions should be loosened so that it doesn't stifle economic development, it's very easy to look back and say, what economic development besides your own? So those are my final thoughts. Thanks again. It's a pleasure being with you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. Dr. Andre, your further thoughts on your final word?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me commend both the ambassador and the lawyer for their fantastic presentations and so on. And let me commend you for having this discussion and for Lambi to facilitate it and showing to engineer it. But these are issues that we have to meditate on, even if we don't want to talk about it publicly, because it affects our lives. We can't escape it. We are affected by it in one way or the other, irrespective of how much we protest that it is not our business. That our business is basically to praise the Lord. Which Lord? The God above or the God, as in the government of Dominica? Charity begins at home. Whatever thou doest to others, that you do unto me. These are the sayings, biblical sayings that we were weaned on, as in WEANED, that we were nurtured on, that had some meaning. But that meaning has been cast by the wayside. It means it doesn't resonate in our minds at all. What resonates in our mind is the insidious effects of the God of Mammon, as in money. And that unfortunately has stolen our present. It has stolen our past. And if we allow it to, it will steal our future. But I am convinced that there are Dominicans who, upon reflection, will not allow Dominica to sink into that hole of corruption, bigger than debauch, that hole where, quite frankly, you have absolutely no compassion or caring from your brother or for the least among you. And bear in mind one thing, the strength of a society is measured by the strength of its weakest link. Not by those who live in palatial mansions or who build houses of dark secrets in Roseau, those who ignore the plight of the poor, but the ability of the poor to resurrect itself, to repair itself, to find reparations within them when there are no reparations coming from outside. There will be no white knight on a horse carrying a crocus bag of money to repair us, because they will look at us with disdain and say, look, you're doing such a poor job helping your own kind. Why should we bother? And in so doing, by ruling ourselves in that way, we undermine the main justification for receiving reparation. That is to say, you have to repair the harm you did when you, in leadership positions, and are harming your very own. And so I hope we reverse that trend. I certainly hope that perhaps when the other institutions of Dominica, they found their voices or their consciences, when they have discovered or they have embraced or re-embraced what it means to be a good citizen or a good Christian, someone who cares for something, I hope that will be the start of a new day, the dawn of a new day, quite frankly. the dawn of a day when we don't even have to speak about reparations because we would be on our way to making do with our own resources, building on our strengths, using our resources, getting outlets for them, educating our young persons, taking advantage of all the new technology, when we would do not have to need somebody coming with a crocker's bag of handouts and saying, look, because you cannot provide for yourselves. I hope one day we can say, quite frankly, Gaston, we will succeed whether you come with that crocker's bag or not, whether you come riding a white horse or not. We will succeed one way or the other. So, good night to the listeners, and thank you for the program, Mr. G.
Oh, thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks a lot, Crispin. Mark, I didn't realize that you were the son of Michael, who was so very close to me. I appreciate you a lot more for that now. I just want to say thank you to all the folks, wonderful folks who are with us on Facebook and on YouTube. Thank you, Lambi and Sherwin, keeping us on the air. And just left for me to say a very pleasant good night to each and every one of you and to each and every one of the people who are following us on Facebook and on YouTube. So good night, gentlemen. Take care.
Thank you.
Till next
All
time.
right. Thank you.
On Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Charting the way forward into our future.